Hi guys, this is Lalana. Thanks for tuning in to the Sovereign Path. Sorry for the lighting in here. It's a little fuzzy. I don't know why. What's going on with the sun. So today we're going to talk about how inner union with the feminine affects the masculine on this path. So this is kind of one of those, again, kind of one of those nuanced situations. So when the divine feminine finally comes into inner union and actually anchors inner union, this is a higher frequency. This is a fifth dimensional frequency of unity consciousness that the feminine is now, vibrating at, living in, embodying, right? So this is a completely different frequency from the third dimensional vibration frequency of separation consciousness. When this happens and the feminine is, as I said, anchored here, so there's no more fear-based energy, there's no more like coming in and out of balance, there's no more triggering from the masculine. If the masculine comes in and, sort of triggers or whatever, the feminine just sees it as what it is and it just doesn't really affect them anymore. Again, not gender specific. Once you've come into inner union as a feminine, it's a whole different playing field at that point. So when you've come into this energy, when you've embodied this frequency as one consciousness, this affects the masculine as well. So the thing is that we hear a lot, I hear a lot, I get questions a lot around the masculine awakening. And the thing is that the feminine, generally speaking, is looking for these same signs, these same sort of synchronicities, these same energetic awarenesses, higher awarenesses, gifts, all of these things to be present in the masculine in the same way they are in the feminine. So in other words, as I've said in other videos, the masculine is the master of the material realm. The feminine is the master of the spiritual realm, right? These are the higher chakras, the lower chakras. We meet in the middle in the heart chakra, which is the actual compass, the actual tether to source that is connecting us at all times as we go through these physical realities. So the way that the masculine is going to show up in regard to their higher awareness, their higher consciousness, and how that's going to look is going to be different than how it looks or how it's showing up for the feminine, right? Because the feminine is mastering the crown chakra, the third eye chakra, right? The throat chakra. The masculine is mastering the root chakra, the sacral chakra, the solar plexus, right? They meet in the middle, right? As above, so below. As within, so without. And so we're looking a lot of times for these signs in the masculine to be like, well, are they awakening? Are they not awakening? Are they doing their work? Are they not? All of these sort of things. And as I've said in other videos, we can't be like looking to the masculine and thinking that they're like, I'm doing the work, so you're doing the work, and it's equal. And so, we're having all of these equal things. And if I'm doing it, then that means that he's doing it or she's doing it. And so I'm looking over there to see, like, are you matching my frequency? Are you matching what I'm doing? All of these sort of things. It's natural for us to think that way and to feel that way, but that is not actually how this happens. The feminine has to be completely anchored first within your own energetic field, right? You have to have completely come back home to self-love, self-worth, self-value, back to source, back home to soul, back home to higher self, all of these things, and you are vibrating higher now, right? As I said, you are vibrating in that fifth dimensional frequency. When this happens, this is when the masculine will start to feel this shift within, because it's one consciousness. This shift within the masculine is going to play out in different ways depending on how strong the ego of the masculine is, how receptive they are to, you know, all of this new frequency and all of these changes that are going on within them. Some masculines shut down, they go quiet, they stop communicating altogether. Others will like kind of embrace it and get into the spiritual arts. Others will just sort of feel the shift and they'll just be magnetized back to the feminine, and they don't really know why. They don't really get it. Others will find that the situations that potentially they have been, interacting with in the 3D start to fall apart. Jobs, relationships, all of these sorts of things. So it plays out differently in the masculine. And that's why we can't look to the masculine as saying like, okay, you're having your spiritual awakening now, and so, your gifts are coming online, and we can't look at them in the same way that we have experienced this as the feminine, because it doesn't play out in the same way. This is the yin and yang principle, right? This is the positive and the negative polarity. They're not going to look exactly the same, and we can't expect for them to. But it is one consciousness. And so the consciousness of the one is affected by the higher vibratory state of the feminine as they come into inner union. So the masculine is going to be going through their shifts. It's going to happen. Yes, it's going to happen. But how it plays out in them is not like this verbatim, this is what it is and this is always what it's going to look like and all of these sort of things. It's going to be unique. And this is why I've said in, other videos from time to time that there are times for the feminine when the feminine comes in and anchors into inner union. And this is what I was talking about in my, when you no longer desire the divine masculine, we no longer desire the twin anymore because now you're in inner union. What's actually going on for the feminine is that the feminine, once the feminine is anchored in this fifth dimensional frequency, the feminine is not interested in anything that has to do with the third dimensional vibration of separation and lack and fear-based energies and attachment, and all of these things. And so when the masculine is still running these programs, the feminine is not going to be interested in like playing out those programs with the masculine. And this is a lot of what creates that feeling of not being in that desiring state anymore, because the feminine is no longer running that fear-based energy where desire lives. The feminine is now running, unconditional love, high vibrational interconnectedness with other, oneness, all of these higher frequency, vibrations. And so as the feminine continues to, expand in their own consciousness, the masculine will be in this energetic situation, for lack is not a situation, but this energetic frequency that they're going to be feeling from the feminine, because again, this is one consciousness. And for a lot of masculines, this is going to be pushing them and all of their stuff from their egoic conditioning that they have taken on. All of this stuff is going to be coming up to the surface for them. How they deal with that is unique, right? And so this is the thing. How they deal with that is unique, because, and not only just for the masculine, but for the feminine as well. A lot of the reason that the feminine takes so long to get through this path, me being one of them, is because sometimes the feminine just does not want to release the program. They don't want to release the ego. The ego trappings feel very, very strong and feel very, very much like this is who I am. And so this also plays out obviously with the masculine a lot of the times. They can feel all of these shifts that are going on, but they can also resist all of these shifts going on. No different than the feminine can resist these shifts as we're embarking upon the awakening path and the ascension path. This is when I say, people will dig their heels in the ground, and you can slow this process down. This is what creates the loops. It's what creates the spinning. When we're in that situation where we simply just don't want to let go, we just don't want to surrender to what's happening, A lot of times because we don't understand it, other times because we just don't want it, the ego doesn't want it. This can definitely slow the processes down. And so for some masculines, when the ego is very, very strong and, you know, the soul is knocking on the door to be like, okay, it's time to release these things, there are masculines that have a very difficult time doing that. There are other masculines that really embrace the shifts and the change, and that's just what it is, you know, and they come into that higher vibrational state as well. But even when the masculine comes into a higher vibrational state to meet the feminine, it's still not going to look exactly the way that it looks for the feminine, right? And so I just really want to kind of drive this home, because if you're always looking for the masculine to just like be suddenly like right there by your side and you're both like doing the exact same things and you know you're both doing spiritual work or you know you're both like tapping into your clairs or whatever it might be, you know what I mean, then not to say that that can't happen, but that's not usually how this thing plays out, because that's not the functionality of the masculine in this physical reality. It's for them to master the material realm. And that's why I've said before, and I hit on it only briefly here and there in some of my videos. At some point I may do a longer video on this, but this is why you see awakened divine masculines who are actually embodying their divinity, embodying their higher knowing, their higher awareness, their true consciousness, as being a lot of these, you know, guys, for lack of, you know, it can be women as well, that are breaking through these lower vibrational, you know, situations that are happening in the matrix. These are the guys who are doing that sort of underground work, right? The code breakers, you know, the curse breakers, all of these sort of things that are like seeing through all of these veils that have been basically infiltrated into the matrix for eons, right? This is the divine masculine works in this material realm in their divinity when they have come into that divinity. All of them know. Some of them are conscious of this and they are actively doing this work. Some of them are unconscious of this, but they are still part of that collective consciousness grid that is breaking apart these patriarchal conditionings and things like that. Whereas the feminine is the higher aspect, who is the material one, right? Who is communicating with the higher aspects of things. This, and for just like a little brief thing. And so this is how that yin and yang principle works together, right? So this is basically what we're doing. And so as I said, some masculines are conscious of the work that they are doing once they get to a certain point on this path, right? But some of them aren't, and that's fine. And there's no, like, again, there's no right or wrong. It's not like every single person has to be doing, you know, overt spiritual work. Some do, some don't. We have lots of, you know, masculine and feminines who are fully awakened, who are in tons and tons of different industries within the, you know, the physical realm, that are raising the vibration within those certain industries. This is why we see changes all the time, you know, happening in regard to Earth as a whole. So to sort of bring that back, when the feminine is in inner union, anchored in inner union, that is when you are going to see the shifts happen for the masculine. This can be the ego death that's going on for them. This can be whatever addictive tendencies that they may have been dabbling in falling apart. This can be like if there are any third-party situations. This doesn't always mean romantic. This can be any kind of third energy that is always been sort of at the forefront of coming in between the interaction, or it's been distracting the masculine. These things will start to fall apart. It can be work, it can be, you know, any of those things. These things will start to fall apart. So the masculine's world will start to shift. These things will start to happen as the feminine has anchored into inner union. But that doesn't mean it's going to look like it looked for you, right? And so we need to not be thinking that that's always the way it's going to look. If it looked like this for me, then that means it's going to look like that for them. No, this is the yin and yang principle. This is the positive and negative polarity, which is one, right? This works as one. And so hopefully that helps you guys a little bit, to give a little bit of more clarity around that, because we have this idea that, you know, we keep looking over like, you know, but isn't the masculine awakening because I'm awakening, and isn't the masculine doing the work because I'm doing the work? The masculine cannot, and this is one of the videos that I did, the masculine can't come into their sovereignty until the feminine has come into their sovereignty. The feminine leads on this path, always, always, always. But at the same time, once the feminine is anchored in inner union, the feminine is not going to be concerned about what the masculine is doing anymore. And that's the paradox on this path, right? Because the feminine you're just in your higher vibrational state. You've collapsed duality. You're back into oneness within. And so at that point, you're not going to be asking any questions anymore about what the masculine is doing, or if they're catching up, or if they're having their ego death, or, you know, if they're, you know, things are falling apart, you know, if they're facing their stuff, whatever else. The feminine is just not going to be concerned about that at that point, because you are just going to be back into your wholeness and back into your completeness. And it's just not going to be a concern for you. This is why I also say it's not going to be a concern for you whether or not you are in romantic partnership with your twin or not. It's just one of those things. You are in a complete freedom state. And so you can take it, and that's great, or you can leave it, and that's great, and whatever else, and that it's just great, whatever it is, because you are in oneness now. You're not running that template anymore that's saying, I need to have romantic partnership with the twin. Because you've collapsed this duality, you've collapsed this separation, and there's no more lack coming up within you. There's no more of those states of feeling like, I need this or I need that. Because now you are completely fulfilled within. And the paradox of that is that once you're completely fulfilled within and you don't need anything external, suddenly all the things show up for you externally that are mirroring that fulfillment within. You know, this is why this is that paradoxical situation. But I also want to make a point to say that the masculine, no different, as I said, than the feminine, can dig their heels in the ground. They can, you know, resist this process, you know, and they can resist this process. And so, yes, you're one consciousness, but you're also dealing with two egos. You have an ego and they have an ego. And that's the way this thing is playing out in this physical reality. And so if the masculine's ego is very strong, and if they're very stuck in those patterns and programs, and if they're really, really moving from that logical mind, and they're just resisting these shifts and these changes that are coming up for them, then it's going to take them longer to get into that higher frequency in order to reflect that back to you. But as I said, once you're in inner union, you're not going to be concerned about that. You're not going to be asking any of these questions anymore, because the fear-based questions, which are what these are, they're just going to have dissipated. They're not going to be a part of your vibration anymore. They're not going to be around anymore. So you're not going to be concerned by that. But to add on to the end of this, and that is to say that one of the reasons that the feminine chooses a high vibrational soulmate to be in romantic partnership with after they have come into inner union, rather than choosing to be with the physical masculine, the twin, is because the physical aspect of the twin is still going to be the master of that material realm, which means for a lot of them, they're still going to have more ego, or they're still going to have some of those, you know, patterns that the feminine may not want to, or may not feel that they are a vibrational match to, because it's a positive and a negative polarity, right? Because it's a yin and yang. So the thing of this is, and I mentioned this in one of my other videos, is a high vibrational soulmate is going to be able to match the feminine exactly where they are within the frequency that the feminine has now anchored in inner union, right? There isn't a yin and yang principle in that, because there is, but it is not your same consciousness, right? So you're not dealing with your same exact consciousness. And so that consciousness is not doing this yin and yang principle of having an opposite and a negative, right? An opposite and negative, an opposite, right? Opposites, right? It's not having a positive and a negative in the same way, because this is your same consciousness. Whereas the high vibrational soulmate is going to be on your same wavelength, right? They're going to be in a similar vibration as you, a similar frequency as you, speaking a similar language as you. And some feminines feel that this is just a higher vibrational interaction that they choose to have because the high vibrational soulmate can meet them where they are, right? Whereas the masculine, even as the masculine continues to rise in their vibration and go through these things, it's still going to be that yin and yang principle, right? It is oneness, but that oneness is a positive and a negative charge. So hopefully that makes sense. And so for some feminines, this is why they choose a high vibrational soulmate. So hopefully that resonates, you guys. Hopefully that makes sense. So as far as the timeline gap, right, there is a timeline gap for the masculine being able to meet the feminine in a higher vibrational state, for the masculine to go through their process once the feminine has anchored into inner union. This is why there is that time delay, because once the feminine is anchored, then the masculine is going to start being affected fully by this higher vibrational energy that the feminine is now holding. And so this is what propels the masculine on their journey, basically, right? On their path. Because they've done their work of triggering the feminine to have all of these things come up. And the feminine has done all of her work and now coming into inner union. And so now this is when, as one consciousness, that starts to affect the masculine, and whatever ego programmings and conditionings that they have been running now will start to break apart, right? Start to fall apart. What they do with that is what they do with that, right? And that's why I say that in some videos. There are a lot of people on this path that resist the hell out of this thing. And like I say, they push their heels in the ground. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to face their stuff. They don't want to make the shifts. It's just a big fat no. Either they don't want to do the deep dives, and it takes time in those situations. And for some people, this path, this is why it can take so long for a lot of people, years and years and years. It just depends on, if you're willing to surrender to the process or not. And that is definitely coming from, that fear-based energy and that ego programming. Some of this stuff is really entrenched, and some people just don't want to let go. And this is why I've said in several of my videos, the quote that says, let go or be dragged. You can surrender to it and it's going to be a whole lot easier, or, you can fight it like hell. And like Abraham Hicks says, and get in the boat and start, paddling against the current as hard as you can. But the current's always going to win, right? The current's always going to win. But people do make it harder for themselves. A lot of the times. I think a lot of us absolutely do that. And that's part of the process as well. So anyway, I hope that resonates with you guys. I hope that clears up some of the confusion. But I just want to make this one more point, and that is to say, for the feminine, if you're always thinking okay, well, they're going to catch up with me. Okay, well, once I come into inner union, the masculine is going to finally catch up, or they're going to go through their work, or they're going to all of those sort of things, then you're going to continue to see that show up in your reality. So just have that awareness that you are the creator, and you are creating things based on what you're focusing on, what you're believing in, the programs in your subconscious mind are running. And so if you're still in that place of going, okay, as soon as I do this, then I'll get rewarded by that, then you're going to continue to see that same theme show up. And this is why I say that it's so important, and that you got to take your focus off what the masculine is doing. And we can't have these aims of, as soon as I get into inner union, then this is going to happen for me. Because as soon as you get into inner union, you're not going to give a damn anymore about all these questions that you've been asking anymore, because you will have shifted out of the 3D frequency and into the 5D frequency, where there is no more fear-based energy, which means there's no more questions going on, right? So just have that awareness. If you're always kind of looking like, okay, well, the masculine is doing this, and you know, the masculine collective is doing this, and that's keeping you in a loop, and it's going to keep you seeing that same theme playing out, because you're actually creating that by what you're focusing on and what you're believing in. You know, you have to just trust the masculine's going to do, they're going to do what they need to do as soon as the soul deems they need to do it. And if they resist it, that's part of the process as well, but that's not your concern. And I know that sounds crazy and harsh or whatever else, but this is your same consciousness. This is your soul. So you have to trust, as I've said in a lot of my videos, that the soul is orchestrating this process. And once you've come into inner union, you have done your process. Now your consciousness is going to continue to expand. You're not going to be concerned about what the, you know, what the aspect of the masculine is doing, right? So just have that awareness. We really need to pay attention to where our focus is, and that focus needs to be on you and what you're doing, bringing it back home to you over and over again, living your best life, raising your vibration, paying attention to all of the stuff that's coming up, transmuting these energies, all of these sort of things, okay? So you do you, feminine, and once you come into inner union, you'll have a better idea of how this thing changes the entire game, right? Now you're holding the deck of cards. You were always holding the deck of cards, but then you have a better awareness of what that actually means. So I hope that resonates, you guys, and you have an awesome day.